98 nations competed in the 1995 Judo Championships in Shiba, Japan. In 1997, 110 countries were present at the Paris Championships. Since the 1992 Barcelona Olympic Games, Judo has ranked second amongst the most universal sports and has been watched by a large number of television viewers. It means that at the present time, millions of people practice or have practiced this activity throughout the world. In the beginning was the word of Jigoro Kano, giving a lesson in his dojo at Kodokan. Touching pictures. The whole story could be summed up as follows. A frail young man, because he was bullied by his comrades, took upon himself to become a master in the art of unarmed combat, as it was practiced by the samurai. Judo was born.
Le fondateur du judo, Jigoro Kano, maître Jigoro Kano, était un être exceptionnel.
The founder of judo, Jigoro Kano, master Jigoro Kano, was an exceptional human being. It's true that he was a man of the 19th century, but his ideas were quite modern. He was a brilliant scholar, an intellectual who had earned a reputation in the Japanese society. He was a prominent member, that is, he held a high position at the imperial court. He was dean of the Teachers' Training College. First, he strove for the creation of an attractive method of physical education. For doing so, he took some techniques from the jujitsu, the art performed by the warriors, and created judo. He also struggled in order that Japan become a member of the International Olympic Committee, and he was himself the first Japanese to belong to this committee.
The Kano method, which at first had to impose itself against other schools of jiu-jitsu in memorable contests, became compulsory in all Japanese schools. Here, filmed in 1907, is a demonstration performed by Master Kano in front of the Emperor of Japan. Judo, as Kano saw it, was a complete educational method on the art of making the most of one's energy. And what was learned on the mat should also serve in everyday life. Teachers were trained at Kodokan, the place where wisdom, or it could be said, where life was taught. A demonstration by Kano's pupils, Nagaoka and Mifume, for instance, shows that from the start, yesterday's judo contained the judo of today. It was up to the pupils who had become masters to spread judo abroad.
La diffusion du judo et sa promotion est assez originale.
The way judo expanded and gained a worldwide popularity is rather unusual. It is indeed quite extraordinary. It's one of the rare, perhaps even the only example of a sport, I think, which developed in Asia. And from the beginning of the 20th century, as soon as 1910, 1915 in Europe, a certain number of judo teachers trained at Kodokan with Master Jigoro Kano. And then they came to Germany, to Italy, and also to England and France.
Judo, in its development, benefited from the myths of superiority and invulnerability which had accompanied the introduction of jiu-jitsu. Judo jiu-jitsu, in its progress, sometimes followed surprising paths. A demonstration of judo, a rather rudimentary kind of judo, is performed on the front line by Senegalese infantrymen during the First World War.
qui a accompagné la promotion du judo, assurément, c'est la...
There is no doubt that the mystic aspect of judo played an important part in its promotion. There was also a certain number of habits, of behaviors. People talked about kwatsu, about reviving methods. And I think it is better to consider the question from a realistic standpoint. The people who taught judo, the persons who taught, the masters, had and still have today a solid knowledge of anatomy, but they never pretended they were physicians. And sometimes people were inclined to exaggerate their actions. But what they did, or the way they acted, only came from their intention to give help. It is true that it was expressed that way, but it never was the cry that kills, the cry that revives. But I think, as always, the marvelous appeals to people so much that they tend to exaggerate a little.
De Herth et Picmal s'expliquent en finale. De Herth conserve son titre et en fin de combat, l'arbitre, le professeur Cavassay, de 2 plaques sur les pectoraux rétablira la circulation du sang arrêtée chez Picmal.
In Europe, such myths were passed on and magnified by the cinema and the music hall, and also in literature.
L'accès des cages aux fauves était jusqu'à ce jour réservé aux seuls dompteurs professionnels. Mais André Mercier, président du syndicat des judokas français, démontre que la ceinture noire de judo est une assurance suffisante pour venir à bout de n'importe quelle tigresse. Un kia d'appel ou un kia spécial inhibant valent tous les regards magnétiques de dompteurs. Les photographes gardent leur distance, mais André Mercier cherche la sienne, toujours avec le même succès. La tigresse est littéralement envoûtée. La démonstration s'achève enfin sur le complet asservissement du fauve, devenu véritable matou d'appartement.
It was only in the first part of the 20th century that judo got organized, and that its educative aspect, as it was conceived by its founder, and as it is taught in Kodokan, seen in the following pictures, became attractive to people. In France, for instance, the development of judo can be explained by the involvement of exceptional men such as Moshe Feldenkrais, seen here with Jigoro Kano, or such as Master Kawaishi. Among Master Kawaishi's pupils was Nobel Prize winner Frédéric Joliot-Curie. He sits here with his wife Irene. Another pupil was Paul Bonnet-Maury, first president of the French Federation. Paul Bonnet-Maury also played an important part in the creation of the European Union and the International Federation of Judo.
Le judo est maintenant un pont au-dessus des mers entre la France et le Japon. Et chaque année, nous désirons inviter un champion japonais choisi par le docteur Kano pour venir en France et en Europe.
Il y a des intellectuels.
There were intellectuals of all kinds, men of undisputable stature, generally scientists who got interested in judo, men who were sportsmen, but who were particularly interested in judo. Well, there was Joliot-Curie, there was Bonnet-Maury. These people were right in the center of scientific research. What can account for this interest in judo is perhaps that there was a little more than an immediate competition. The reason was perhaps that there was a formula, which was the smaller opponent is not afraid of the bigger one. A smaller contender can defeat a much bigger or heavier opponent. It may be that. But I also believe that there was, and I'll say it once again, the educative side. And they were keen in this aspect, the great academics, the professors, and the different masters.
Mikinosuke Kawaishi, a judoist and great traveler, settled in France in 1936 after a visit to the United States and Great Britain.
Kawaishi, en tout cas,
In any case, Kawaishi knew what he was doing, and I have always said that there were two Kawaishis. The great Kawaishi who made judo in France, who made judo in Europe, and who was at the origin of the expansion of judo in the world, and that he did it more than the first Japanese. There had been Koizumi in England. There had been other experts who had traveled around the world, but in a certain way, what they did affected a limited number of people. They were good judoists, but they were not really influential. Very quickly, he decided to form teachers, who, in their turn, would be responsible for the formation of other teachers, which was my case. At the end of the war, I left for Belgium, where I developed judo there, then in Holland and then at Cuba. And from that very development, starting directly with the Kawaishi method, both North and South America have been totally taken with judo. And after a couple of years, they founded the Pan American Federation and sent a Pan American team to fight in France and in Europe.
An ambassador for good judo, Jean de Hert, won the first European Championships in the third Dan category in 1951 in Paris. In the final, he triumphed over the British contestant Gleason. Thanks to these championships, a rangy young man, defeated here by the Frenchman Dupré in the brown belt final, got unexpected public notice. His name was Anton Giesink.
La Fédération internationale a été créée en 1951 à la suite d'une initiative.
On the initiative of the European Union, which had already existed at the time, the International Federation was created in 1951, and in 1952 was presided over by Master Rizei Kano, son of the founder of judo. And at that time, 4 Pan-American countries, 1 country from the South Sea Islands and 1 from Asia, joined the 13 European nations, which had created the International Federation, reaching the number of 19 countries. Africa is not mentioned, and sometimes we tend to forget that African leaders in those times were associated with a large number of European structures. Sometimes we're inclined to speak of 4 unions. There were actually 5.
Even though Japan sends its messengers abroad, its judo remains a great mystery. Rare are the ones who have the privilege to attend the encounters between East and West, as in 1953. There is no doubt, there is Japanese judo on one side, and there are the others. This is the Terra Daigo, the champion of Japan touring Europe. Here he is challenged by 10 of the best French judoists. Only Jean de Hert obtains a draw. The 1956 World Championships, organized in the Holy of Holies, Tokyo, for the first time in history, are awaited eagerly. After a long trip, judoists coming from 31 nations meet in a single category. The bouts last 10 minutes. The final lasts 20 minutes. Natsui, the Japanese, is the winner. After defeating his compatriot Yoshimatsu in the final, Natsui becomes the world champion. The Dutchman Anton Giesink comes third. Nearly 40 years later, still in Japan, the 19th Shiba World Championships open with 98 countries represented. Ladies can now take part. Referees are smartly dressed. Points are displayed on an electronic board. The mats are not raised above ground level anymore. There are 7 weight divisions by now, for men as well as for women, plus 1 all-category division in which lightweights rarely compete. Men's matches cannot exceed 5 minutes, and women's 4 minutes. And now, ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to see is quite something. Here are some men and women champions during their victorious finals.
Medals and certificates are being the 5th place, Sylvia.
The champions are not exclusively Japanese, far from it, especially when you see the women champions. That is certainly the reason why the tiny Tamura is a star in her country and has even become the heroine of a cartoon. This sport is the constant creation of the men and women who practice it, and who, in their turn, are transformed by this same creation. After Shiba in 1995 and Paris in 1997, nothing will ever be the same. Yet, if judo progresses more and more, it also respects tradition. A tradition which is totally contained in the teaching of katas, the fundamentals of judo, that is, the science of judo holds. Starting from these bases, judo champions also bring their personal touch and contribute to the technical advance of the sport. In the past, as in the present, the Uchimata movement has always been favored by judoists. Uchimata is precisely the movement that the Dutchman Anton Geesink preferred. Geesink was the first non-Japanese judoist to be lionized. He also was, and this is sometimes overlooked, the most Japanese of all Western judoists. He visited the country of the rising sun several times and lived there for more than 2 years, learning from the great Japanese masters. Yet the day he put an end to Japanese invincibility, a quake hit the planet judo. Anton Geesink at work. 3 Japanese are competing in the 1961 Paris World Championships. Geesink is most of the time in a standing position. Stepping backward or forward, he's always taking the offensive. His goal is the decisive point, the ippon. When it's necessary, he can also work so as to bring about a series of actions on the floor. His judo truly bears the Japanese stamp. During the 1964 Olympic Games in Tokyo, judo is admitted as a sport of demonstration, and a whole nation believes that its champion, Kaminaga, is going to erase the affront suffered 3 years before in Paris. Unfortunately, right from the preliminary heat, Geesink is back. After a curious system of qualification, he meets Kaminaga again, but this time in the final. The 130 kilograms of the Dutch giant crush Kaminaga and a whole nation. An entire country is struck with dismay. The words national mourning are even mentioned. Geesink has become a legend and lives in Utrecht, in a street which bears his name. When he gives up competition, the Japanese think they're going to recover their supremacy. But they don't reckon with the emergence of the German and Soviet judoists. And above all, they don't reckon with Willem Ruska, Anton Geesink's pupil. One Dutch champion can hide another. Ruska becomes world champion in 1967 and 1971. He wins the Olympic title in 1972 when judo becomes a full-fledged Olympic sport. During the 1972 Olympic Games in Munich, Ruska wins the double title of heavyweight champion and all-category champion. Ruska thus becomes the second legendary heavyweight champion of modern-time judo. The third judoist to achieve such a double nearly 20 years later is Japanese. This is a moment worth waiting for. Here is Yasuhiro Yamashita, judo incarnate. When only a junior, he goes on tour with the University of Tokai and meets the French team. Nobody knows who he is yet. Having been the best judoist of Japan for several years, he wins his first world title in 1979 in Paris against the Frenchman Jean-Luc Rouget. Three other titles of world champion will follow, including the heavyweight and all-category double in 1981 in Maastricht. After missing the 1980 Olympic Games, he wins the heavyweight title in 1983 in Moscow, a just recompense. As in the Olympic Games of Los Angeles, Yamashita is able to win with one leg injured. Frenchman David Douillet has recently entered the exclusive circle of mythical heavyweight champions.
You know what I used to do when I was a kid and I won a championship? When I became champion of Seine-Maritime, I took a map and I looked at the Seine-Maritime and the area it covered, its limits, etc., and I told myself, I'm really proud. I'm the champion of all that region. Then it was the turn of Normandy, and I would do the same thing. When you win the French championship, you take the map and you see France, and you think, it's great. You're the champion of all that, with all that that means. And then one day, you don't do it anymore. And one day your grandmother calls you on the phone and tells you, you know my grandson that I cried this morning? And why is that, Grandma? It's because I came across a map of the world and I thought, it's my grandson who's the champion of all this. And at that moment, I cried.
When he took part in the 1997 World Championship, he had won an Olympic title and 3 world titles, including the double title, heavyweight and all category. He has the same cat-like agility as Yamashita and is a complete judoist. As for women champions, the Belgian champion Ingrid Bergmans deserves a special mention. She won the world title 6 times, twice in the light heavyweight division, that is under 72 kilograms, and even more exceptional, 4 times in the all category division. Women's judo is not as ancient as men's judo, but Ingrid Bergmans truly belongs to its legend.
Si dès le début, les femmes pratiquaient le judo, il a fallu attendre...
Even if from the start women have practiced judo, they had to wait until 1974 to see the first international tournament organized at Gênes, and then 1980 to see the first World Championships organized in New York in the USA. 27 countries were engaged, 150 women took part in the competition. At Macquarie, there were 64 countries and more than 240 women judoists, which constituted a real progression. The International Olympic Committee has wished to salute this success, given that the women's participation in Atlanta and Barcelona had been exceptional.
In order to obtain the same possibilities of expression as men, women had to fight, but not on the mats. When they obtained them, they made up for lost time. From the beginning, they practiced a technical, offensive, and spectacular judo. The French, Austrian, Dutch, and British schools worked wonders. Then the World Championship revealed exceptional talents. Karen Briggs, 4 times world champion. Brigitte Dédier, 3 times world champion. Fong Ling Gao, 4 times world champion. Min Sun Cho, Olympic champion and twice world champion. Not forgetting the trio of French Olympic and world champions. It was to be difficult for the Japanese to encroach on the territory of the best women champions. Kaori Yamaguchi and Ryoko Tamura were the 2 exceptions which proved the rule. The situation was similar to that of Giesink and Ruska regarding Japanese judo, for as soon as the weight divisions appeared at the beginning of the 1960s, the Japanese carried off all the medals, doing the Grand Slam at the 1969 World Championships in Mexico and 1973 World Championships in Lausanne. Here are the greatest of the great, Okano, Olympic and world champion. Okano, a middleweight, was also an all-category champion in Japan. Fuji, 4 times world champion. Koga, 4 times world champion. Ogawa, also 4 times world champion.
When the Japanese reached the finals, they were always fresher than we were, simply because nobody could go through with the matches against them. Because to wear them out, we were more or less conscious of it. It was not necessarily planned, but anyway, given the aura attending the Japanese, when considering their history, we did not get through because they also had a possibility to have a second chance when you did not exhaust your opponent completely. The Japanese were fresher than we were. It was a reality. In Vienna, we all decided, the whole world decided to say no to that. It was not a watchword, but we were aware of it. After all the matches we had fought against the Japanese, we knew that we too, and not only the Japanese, were very good. So that when they got to the final, they were in the same state as we were. That is to say, completely worn out. As a consequence, a lot of Europeans won. And we won the world title.
The breach opened by Jean-Luc Rouget was widened by Vladimir Nevzorov, world and Olympic champion. Then other champions swept in and became part of the legend as well. Thierry Rey, world champion, Olympic champion. Neil Adams, world champion. Angelo Parisi, Olympic champion. Seisenbacher, double Olympic champion. Canu, double world champion. Le Gien, twice Olympic champion. Nastula, world champion, Olympic champion. Kelmans, twice world champion, Olympic champion.
Quelquefois, les gens en oublient que le judo.
It sometimes happens that people forget that judo is not solely an Olympic game. Judo is much more than that. Judo is also an Olympic sport, but it is also much more. And that is to say that the teaching, the degrees, and all that is based on the transmission of knowledge has always been thoroughly worked at. Judoists have always attached a great importance to the passing on of their knowledge. This transmission at the same time includes respect for the master, but also respect for the pupil. And it is also a form of mutual understanding and privileged relations, destined to facilitate this transmission. It is, I think, one of the reasons which accounts for the harmonious development of judo in the different countries.
Judo is a school of life. It gets existence underway. There is no physical effort if there is no character, no willpower and intelligence. Judo, by the confrontations it brings about, establishes a maximum number of comparisons between men, teaches self-knowledge and the understanding of others. It is a school of sociability. Judo has virtues, virtues which are taught.
Politeness is respecting others. Courage is doing what is fair. Sincerity is expressing oneself without concealing one's thoughts. Honor is keeping one's word. Modesty is speaking of oneself without vanity. Respect. Without respect, no trust can exist. Self-control is keeping quiet when anger wells up. Friendship is the purest of all human feelings. Judo is a bouquet of all these flowers.